people of the King's Daughters podcast. It has been a while on the podcast, and while there's a lot that's happened, it is an exciting thing to be back on this platform speaking to as many as would listen. Welcome to another episode, and this still remains the King's Daughters podcast. Yes, there'll still be a lot of information passed as to why we have been absent, why we have been, as I would always say, missing in action, and what has happened through the months. It's not up to years, really, but through the months, and how we are not leaving anytime soon. Just a reminder of exactly what we stand for and what we represent as a podcast. This is the King's Daughters podcast, where we have conversations and discussions on different relatable topics that pertain to our identity as Christians on the earth and how to navigate through life as it comes. We also have different guests on this show to discuss these things with us as we move ahead. Yes, and we also have series. We've had Women of Honor series in the Bible, and there's another series called Cooking already. I can't wait to share that with us. I really cannot wait to share that with us. And just in the meantime, is that I have heard I have gotten a lot of when is the King's Daughters podcast starting? We've not heard anything from the King's Daughters podcast. When are we going to receive a new episode? When is a new episode going to be uploaded? Like so many people have asked me at different times. And this is me saying that yes, we are back and we are better. And this is us back. Do not mind what I just said. But then this is a welcome back episode really on the King's Daughters podcast. I would not say that it has actually been the easiest trying to record and edit and all the likes, but that being said, what needs to be done needs to be done, and this is why this episode is out already. Once God places a demand on something, it is our responsibility to show up. It is our responsibility to deliver, really. And this is what has happened. The fact that God has placed a demand on this podcast to push out content that really glorify his name, put out content that address issues that pertain to identity, that pertain to our Christian walk on earth, that pertain to our identity as the children of God, as daughters of the King. It is quite important that there is a delivery on this type of conversations for the whole world to listen. And really, I was listening to something, and he was speaking about how that warfare in our current age and time has kind of evolved. It is not longer the way it used to be, where it's like they did me my father's house. I'm just paraphrasing. They've buried my destiny in my father's house. I'm going to do this. I'm going to pray and pray and that. But he was saying that warfare has turned to whose content, what type of content is pushed out, what type of content dominates the social media space or the spaces that we find ourselves. Now, I'm not saying it has to always be on social media, but it's just that in whatever spaces we find ourselves, what content is pushed out, right? In whatever spheres of influences we find ourselves, in whatever place we find ourselves, in whatever circle we find ourselves, what type of content is pushed out at that circle, or in that circle rather. Is it a content, or is it content or conversations that glorify God? Is it content or conversations that ensure that godly standards are kept, or values that glorify the name of God are kept. At whatever point we find ourselves, what are we essentially doing with our presence there, as in this context, daughters of the king? And as I've always said on this podcast, we are daughters of the king, meaning that we are of a kingdom. We represent a kingdom that is different from the one that is on earth. And we have to constantly be in touch with our roots, with our kingdom, for us to essentially push out the principles, the do's and don'ts, the ordinances and values that sustain our kingdom, or that the foundations upon which our kingdom exists, are the things that we should constantly push out wherever we find ourselves. This is not subject to I don't talk much. This is not subject to I'm a shy person. This is not subject to I don't like confrontational arguments or conversations. Now, I'm not saying that you should start fighting and saying you must. There's this skit I remember years ago where someone went out to preach, and he was trying to preach to this person, and this person refused to listen, and it was like, you must give your life to Christ. It was now turned to like fights. The person started to remove the preacher started to remove his clothes and like, you must give your life to Christ. Oh yeah, say after me. Oh yeah, say after me. This is not that kind of space. As much as possible, it is not going to be more or less a confrontational thing. It's just that the least that can be done at wherever sphere we find ourselves is to stand for the values. That is the least we can do in the conversations we have. For example, there was a conversation going on about something, and normally it would have been that, oh, this should be the order of day, this should be this should be that. But at that point, I was pushed more or less to speak about, or to just push in the kingdom narrative of that particular cause of conversation. And really, I know that in the end we may not have agreed or come to an agreement, but just to let the person know that this type of line of reasoning, or this type of scope of reasoning actually exists, and pushing that into that person's mindset, into that person's not mindset now, into that person's thinking, or course of thinking rather, for lack of a better word. So this year, this is actually the first episode this year. My goodness, I'll just love to say Happy New Year first off in March. Wherever you're listening to this, Happy New Year. This is Happy New Year from the King's Daughters podcast. All right, so back to our conversation is that spiritual warfare as it stands at this time, or in this age, yes, the spiritual warfare as it stands, or as we know it to be, still stands, but it has evolved, or yeah, it has evolved to what I'm speaking about. The Bible says that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities. It goes on to speak about all the scope of the enemies that we have to face as Christians. But it also says that there's also that part of the Bible that speaks about, I think it's the same verse, pulling down strongholds, and bringing down every thought that exalts itself above the name of God. So there is that thinking perspective, that value perspective, that thing that we have to change in the people we meet. And necessarily, it's not like you must change, as it were. It's more like standing boldly for what you believe in, standing boldly for what you believe in, however you want to express it, through your own parts of conversation, through sharing out. Yeah, in the context of this person I was listening to, it was, we should be more confident in sharing out Christian content at whatever point we find ourselves. And he was also saying that the enemy is not ashamed of pushing out his own agenda, of pushing out his own thoughts, of pushing out his own values, of pushing out his own everything. The enemy is not quiet. The enemy is not silent. The enemy is not ashamed. The enemy is not shying away from the conversation. The enemy is boldly proclaiming and boldly talking about what he believes in, through every means possible. And as we are as Christians, it is our responsibility to ensure that that should not continue wherever we are at. That should not continue wherever we are. That should not continue in whatever space we find ourselves. And yes, this is a welcome back episode, and I'm so glad that you have listened to this episode. Yeah, more episodes will be dropping in as the year roll by, and cannot wait to share on the plans, share on the series we have cooking, share on the series that's cooking in the open. All right, thank you so much for listening in. Please share to as many persons as you can. And till next time on the podcast, have a lovely day.